Hey, I'm Matt, and I'm going to show you the basics of soldering. So the first thing when soldering, you're going to need to pick out an iron. There are a few different types out there. They come in all different shapes and sizes. I like to use a soldering station, and I would recommend one where you can change the temperature. You also need to choose your soldering tip. I use a medium to small size chisel tip. It's the most versatile. Next, you need to choose your solder. I like to use 6337. This solder flows well and gives you a better connection over your typical 6040. Some other helpful tools I like to have around are some pliers or tweezers. And you're also going to need some side snips or something to strip the wires. If you find yourself soldering a lot, I would recommend picking up a set of helping hands. They're quite useful at holding your workpiece. Also, I recommend a fan, that way you can blow the smoke out of your face when soldering. The smoke isn't lead based, it's actually the flux, but you still don't want to breathe that in. Be very careful of your soldering iron. This metal part right here can burn you badly. Before you start soldering, you're going to want to choose your temperature. For thicker stuff like battery wire and thicker PCB, you're going to want to use anywhere from 700 to 750 degrees Fahrenheit. And with smaller stuff, like the smaller PCB and smaller wire, you're going to want to use anywhere from 600 to 650 degrees Fahrenheit. For everything in between, you're going to want to use 650 to 700. Before you do any soldering, we're going to want to make sure our tip is clean. You're going to want to wipe it off either with a wet sponge or brass sponge. Another tip I like to do too is to apply a little solder if it's dirty. That way you get it nice and shiny afterwards. If your tip's not shiny, that means it's dirty, and that could cause your solder joints to fail. Now when you solder, you're going to want to apply a little bit of solder to your tip before applying to a joint or a pad. And then I like to apply heat with a 1-2. Apply solder to your pad. Hold it for 1 or 2 seconds, and then you can swipe it off, and you have your pad all nice and tinned. Now, if you hold it there for too short of amount of time, like so, it's not going to apply or flow any solder. If you hold it there for too long, you can damage your component. So my tip that I like to do is a 1-2 apply solder and a 1-2 swipe off. And what we're doing here is called tinning the pad. This prepares your pad to accept the wire. Now, after you have your pads tinned, I'm going to want to go ahead and tin your wire. You might have to strip back your coating of the wire if it's not done so. I like to take my strippers or my side snips like so, apply a little bit of pressure, and rip the coating off. Now is a good time to use our helping hands. I'm going to put the wire inside the clamp. And when tinning the wire, you're going to do pretty much the same thing. You always apply solder to your tip. And then what I like to do is put my iron behind the wire, do my 1-2, heat up the wire, start to apply my solder to the tip and wire. And I want to coat the entire wire and pull off. If you have some solder that is left behind, you can go behind here and wipe it off with your iron. Now what I'm doing with the iron is heating up the wire, so it's allowing the solder to flow right into it. Now these wires are pretty thick, you might have to hold it there longer. Now I have both my tips tinned. Now I like to inspect them and make sure both sides are fairly tinned. This side I missed a spot a little bit, so I'm going to go back in and make sure I have solder on these strands as well. Alright, now we're going to apply our wires to our pad. We're going to do the same thing, apply solder to our tip. And here's where I can use my tweezers or your pliers. We're going to take our negative, put it over our pad, and take our iron, apply our heat to our wire, wait until it melts both the pad and the wire, swipe off, and they're connected. We're going to do the same thing to the positive, apply a little bit of solder. We're going to take our wire, we're going to move it over our pad. We're going to apply the iron to the wire. 1-2, pull off. I'm not happy with my second solder joint, and it actually bridged the connections between negative and positive. Bridging is where you accidentally connect two contacts with solder. If you apply voltage, this could fry your components. We're going to go ahead and pull that back off. So what I'm going to do is apply heat to my wire again, wait until it heats up, and pull it off. Now we're going to clean up the end of your wire by retinning it. Apply a little bit more solder. Check your pads. You might need to retin them as well to clean them up. Gonna want to get it over top your pad. Apply your iron to the wire. Wait until it melts and pull off. Now when tinning your pads, if you happen to bridge both pads, no worries. What I like to do is go ahead and clean my tip pretty good. Apply a tiny bit of solder, not too much. And then apply it to the bridge section and swipe. Now when you swipe, it'll bring most of that bridge solder onto either your iron, or it'll actually swipe it off the connection like you see here. When doing smaller work, the process is very much the same. Start by turning down your temperature. I'm going with 650. Once our iron is cooled down, I like to use just the tip of the chisel for more control. It's the same thing as soldering any other pad. You just have to be more precise and use less solder. You're gonna apply 1, 2, apply some solder, pull off. If you use too much solder, you run the chance of bridging your components and damaging your circuitry. Now you might wonder why you wouldn't just hold your wire and your pad together and skip the tinning steps. This is very difficult to do and almost never gives you a clean, strong solder joint. So that's the basics of soldering. If you guys have any more tricks or tips, make sure to leave them in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe for more builds and tech tips.